Hello and welcome to the COMMnections webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Communication program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion on communications during times of disaster. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note, today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the COMMnections playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to our moderator, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Communication program.
Thank you. I'm excited to have Susan Malandrino join us today for this COMMnections series, and thank you all for joining this afternoon. So Susan is currently the Senior Communications Advisor at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. She has just returned from overseas and just began this role, but prior to that, she's done work with the Red Cross and has done storytelling amongst various countries and places, and has a lot of experience and expertise to teach us and provide guidance for those of you that want to perhaps pursue this field. So I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Happy to be here. Thank you, everybody. So I'll just jump right in. We can. All right. So, well, a little bit about me. But Dr. Hernandez kind of did an overview. But yes, I work at the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Specifically, I am the Senior Comms Advisor to the newly elected president. What does that mean? I'm responsible for speech writing, media appearances. The real big ones are strategic communications and risk mitigation. I've only been in the role 3 weeks, so it's been an intense 3 weeks, but jumping right in. Prior to that, I was the manager of international communications at the American Red Cross, which is headquartered just down the street. If you guys take classes in DC, not too far from you, over by the White House. And in that role, I oversaw communications for our international disasters and for our international programs. And then I have a background in comms, undergrad and a master's degree, both in communications, and a couple of decades experience, getting a little long in the tooth here. And then I lived overseas, both in Japan and in England, and have traveled extensively, which, you know, kind of doing this work, you want that's helpful, and having a background where you've experienced different cultures is also a help. All right, so before I get started and tell you a little bit about my experience, I thought it might be helpful to put the global Red Cross and Red Crescent movement in a little bit of context, right? So what does the Red Cross do? So we are the world's largest humanitarian network, and we have a global reach of 16 million volunteers. We are in 191 countries. So almost, not every, but almost every community around the globe, we are there. And then, you know, each year we reach 160 million people. So it's a very, very big umbrella, and a really, if anyone is doing branding here, a really well-known and reputable brand. But what does it actually look like? So this is, I'd say, the biggest question that we get, and that I have to differentiate routinely. There are the 191 national societies. What is that? That is, for example, the American Red Cross, right here in this photo on the top left. The American Red Cross is auxiliary to the government of the United States, but operates independently. So we help out when there are natural disasters, just as the Turkish Red Crescent does, just as the British Red Cross or the Bangladesh Red Crescent. So every country virtually in the world has a Red Cross or Red Crescent society, and they have a slightly different series of expertise, but we are pretty similar. This is the organization I work for, which is commonly called the IFRC, and it is the federating body of all of the Red Cross and Red Crescents. We own these seven fundamental principles of neutrality and humanity, and we're a global secretariat. We coordinate all of the work that is done in the wake of disaster or for vulnerable communities. We are kind of like the mothership, right? The UN of sorts of all of the Red Crosses. And then lastly, there is one other component of our movement, which is called ICRC, which is the International Committee of the Red Cross. So they operate independently, but we share the same fundamental principles. They work in conflict zones, they work with prisoners of war, and they work on maintaining the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law. So all three of these guys, a little bit different, but we all work in concert. Okay, so what does a job in international humanitarian communications look like? You know, a lot of it is strategic communications. Intrinsically, we are reactionary, right? So there is a natural disaster. There is something that is you know, man-made conflict, which we're seeing right now in the Middle East. I just returned from a trip I'll tell you about in a little bit. But you know, these large global disasters or conflicts, we're responding, and we need to be strategic about what we do. How does the Red Cross help people? How does the Red Crescent help people? How are we in communities, and what are we doing? And how does the storytelling that I'm doing and that we're doing really fall in line with our goals as an organization? So being strategic is like first and foremost in every single thing I do. A lot of my day-to-day, particularly my new role, which again is new, is speech writing. A lot of it is social content. So having all of our communications really sync up and have key messages through social, through speeches, and really through that larger storytelling component. The other component really are media interviews. So I am doing media interviews. I am preparing our president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies for media interviews, and I'm preparing other staff. So why do we want to do an interview? What are our key messages? And really, what are we trying to tell the world? And that gets to the next point. We're trying to tell the world how we help people in really these dark and challenging times. I'm monitoring programs, I'm monitoring natural disasters, I'm monitoring media trends, and really the humanitarian landscape. It has been a real challenge. The humanitarian landscape in the past couple of years really has faced unprecedented challenges. So I'm always trying to find out what is happening out there, what is our role, and then how can I put our organization into the larger narrative to really echo our themes, to help people, and to further our work around the globe. Okay, so if you want to work in this type of environment, what is needed? Number one is flexibility. Nothing goes as planned. If you really like rigid structure, this might not be the role for you, or might not be a career that perhaps you want to pursue, because things are utterly and absolutely fluid. Number two, I would say that you have to be curious. You have to be curious about other people. You have to be curious about humanity, and just really about the wider world. Number three is empathy. The Global Red Cross and Red Crescent is really there for people at really, really challenging times. And you need to show empathy in your role as a communicator. And then, you know, the last thing is really ethics. So, you know, oftentimes, and I'm gonna get into some of the specifics about some of the disasters that I've responded to. You are often meeting people on the worst day of their life, right? Their home has burned down. There's an earthquake that has leveled their house and killed their family members. There is a war that has displaced them from their home, right? So I can identify and see a wonderful story and see, oh my gosh, this would be such a great media story. This would be such a great story that we can share with the wider world. But oftentimes, sometimes I don't do it, right? Because my first priority is as a humanitarian first, and then a communicator and a storyteller second. So I always talk about that because I think it's really, really, really key for this type of work. Okay, so like anything, and you guys are most likely, if you're students or your professors, you talk about the why, right? It makes sense to do it does not make any sense to do communications if you don't have the very specific why, right? So why do I do this work, and why is this function important at my place of business? Number one, tell the story, right? It's complicated. Natural disasters are really hard to understand. How people respond to them are hard to understand. I am there to tell the story, and that story is super, super important. I'm also there to shed light on key crises and programs that perhaps have faded from the headlines. Hunger in Africa right now is not getting attention, and it is killing so many people, right? So I need to figure out, how can I shed light on things that we are doing and work that matters, and things that can really move the needle and save lives. And I'm there to help drive donations. So I don't work in fundraising. That would not be for me. If there are any fundraisers on the call, God bless you. That is a hard line of work. But my role goes in tandem, and the role of communications in humanitarian work really does go in tandem with driving donations. It is not our primary focus, but they go in concert. And to that point, brand reputation and credibility. So routinely, I am assessing risks to ensure that we position our organization and our brand in the most credible light. With my most recent trip, we went to, it was a very, very busy trip, but we went to Lebanon and Egypt, and then we went into Gaza. We then went to Israel and met with families of a kibbutz, and then we went into the West Bank. And each of those stops, we were really pushing for diplomatic efforts to help ease the suffering of the conflict in the Middle East right now. It is just absolutely heartbreaking, and our role was to shed light on the fact that as humanitarians, we cannot get assistance into Gaza, and what do we need to do to, how can diplomatic efforts help us in those realms? And again, communication matters because it gets people to volunteer with the Red Cross and Red Crescent. We have a program in Bangladesh that is led by youth volunteers. Bangladesh is one of the lowest lying countries in the world and is really prone to, we have a refugee camp there that is prone to flooding where people die. We have gone out of our way to increase volunteer participation. And with the most simple of tasks, we have volunteers who go around and warn communities when a typhoon is coming. And they are saving lives in the most basic way. It is absolutely incredible. But I get to tell that story. More people want to join the Bangladesh Red Crescent, and more lives are saved. And it's just amazing. And then lastly, accountability. So communicators are here to hold an organization accountable. Someone donates to Red Cross or Red Crescent Society, we need to tell that story of where your money went and how it was used and how those funds really help people. So driving the narrative, humanizing our work, spreading awareness, and securing funds are really kind of the key points for what I do, what our team does, and why we do it. I talk really fast, so pipe up, Dr. Hernandez, if I'm moving too quickly here. Okay.
You both. So
all right. So now you kind of have like the spiel of what and why and who I am and what organization I work for. I thought it might be kind of interesting to share with you a little bit about deploying to international disasters and what that experience is like. It is not all glamour. There are some highs and some lows with it. So, all right. So when a disaster happens, there are specialized Red Cross. This says Red Cross. There are also Red Crescent. Sorry, this was for the American Red Cross previously. I copied this slide from a previous presentation, but there are specialized Red Cross and Red Crescent teams from around the world that are called upon to assist. So I was one of the people who was called upon to assist. in the wake of the massive earthquakes on February 6th in Türkiye. So if you remember, there have been a lot of natural disasters over the past year, but if you remember, this was February 6th. There was an earthquake at 4:17 a.m. I think it was a 7.8, followed by a very, very large aftershock at 1:24 in the afternoon. The tragedy about this aftershock was that people thought the coast was clear, and they went back in their homes, and we had so many, just to get the coats, to get shoes, to get the most basic of necessities, and we had so many people killed in that second quake. So it's really, really intense. But for the earthquake in Türkiye, our teams were on the ground in 48 hours, which is pretty amazing to mobilize. And I was the first American Red Cross delegate deployed to this earthquake, and I stayed in the quake zone for 30 days. So what does that look like? And the fact that people can leave in 48 hours, okay, like, could you get there faster? We are bringing every single thing we eat for a month or longer. We are bringing, in my case, all sorts of equipment, camera equipment, all sorts of things. And then we're also bringing our own tents. We are bringing all the clothes we need. It was about, when I got there, it was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit at night. It was freezing. And, you know, living in a tent is intense when you're bringing all of your stuff and doing everything. So it is quite a production to bring all of your gear, to do all of the things. So it's no small feat to deploy someone to one of these disasters, particularly in a massive disaster of this scale. So I've told you a little bit about what I do and you know what the roles are, but I think it is worth underscoring what the operational challenges look like in a disaster like this. So the earthquake in Türkiye had, there were 50, it ended up being, I think, 54,000 casualties total. So a massive, massive mass casualty event. So first of all, the needs are just enormous. They are just, it feels insurmountable when you first land and arrive. You know, my role is to do communications, which is media interviews, to put stuff on social media. There's no internet connectivity. It's a really, really good challenge, particularly in events like this. We had 14,000 aftershocks just in the 30 days I was there. And I mentioned at the beginning, I'd lived in Japan, and earthquakes don't really rattle me, scare me. But when you look at the destruction around you, I took this picture on the left in a small town called, a province called Hatay. And this city is the size of Atlanta. For any of you, been to Atlanta, metro area, enormous, 400,000 people, every single building leveled. So just to wrap your head around that level of destruction, and you're trying to assess the needs, you're trying to communicate about what is happening, but there are 14,000 aftershocks. And you got to the point where you would kind of know when they would happen because the dogs would start howling and you're like, okay, here comes one. And you could just kind of like brace yourself. It got to the point at the end where I was like, all right, we'll just roll with it. We did have a 6.8 when I was there, which was kind of scary. I was inside a building that wasn't very secure. So that was a little frightening. You're sleeping in a tent. This was my tent. The Danes arrived the day before I did and built this beautiful tent. So I didn't have to use my tiny little pop-up tent. And there was only one restroom and one shower for 40 people. So again, some challenges. It was super cold, really poor air quality, which I'm actually really concerned about that for our population in Türkiye. And then the buildings were being torn down. And then, a complicated political situation. This is the south of Turkey. If you look at a map, right by Syria, as you know, the earthquake impacted Syria as well, although there were probably, I think the casualty numbers in Syria were less, but the challenges in Syria were just so much greater. I did not go into that component. I had we had another team that was responding, and there were just a lot more geopolitical challenges to deal with. But the area where I was in Türkiye had already had 3.5 million Syrian refugees. And I say that just to underscore the geopolitical complexities that were existing into the environment that you're walking in. So, you have a population that is already, this is socioeconomically in the country, one of the most economically challenged portions of the country. And then you already have 3.5 million Syrians who've been displaced numerous times. They finally are on their feet in Türkiye, and then rubble, just absolutely leveled. So some really just kind of compounding heartbreak and compounding challenges through which I wanted to view the crisis or communicate about the crisis. Okay, so what did that look like? Primary role was storytelling and media relations, content creation, stories, videos, meeting people, and then a lot of crisis management. We saw a lot of anger at the government, and because the Turkish Red Crescent, any Red Crescent, any Red Cross is auxiliary to their government, there was some real reputational kind of a little bit of challenges in terms of how people perceived our service delivery. So that presented some really interesting challenges. And then I also liaised with donors. And then one thing I would recommend if you go into this type of role, or really just any kind of communications profession, is really underscoring the value of what you do. So you are there to tell the story, but you also need to tell the story to your organization. And metrics don't lie, right? Metrics don't tell the humanity of things, but metrics are important. And so I was really particular about keeping metrics on this deployment, because there have been a lot of talks about, do we really want to spend the money to send someone here to get out and tell the story? And from my metrics, based on the media coverage we had, which is a potential $2.1 billion potential aggregate viewership of the media hits, over 9,600 media mentions, that equals $74.9 million in advertising equivalency. And we had a total of 400 top tier articles. So again, and any communications, if you walk away with kind of, hopefully, you walk away with multiple things, but definitely walk away with the fact that you need to validate your work to your organization. And then I wanted to share this one little story I met. It was a really intense month in Turkey. Nothing compared to the people who were there, nothing compared to the people who have lost all of their belongings and family members. But I met a trauma counselor who was working with the Turkish Red Crescent. And he told me about the work they were doing. And I thought this was so interesting. He met a man who lost 229 members of his family. And he was talking to me about the trauma of this sort of earthquake and this sort of natural disaster. And I thought that was so interesting and really a message that resonated with the wider world. So we did a whole big media pitch on his experience treating the trauma of the earthquake survivors. And I felt like that really captured just the severity and the intensity and brought home how hard this is to people sitting in Duluth or in Sacramento or somewhere else in the world where Turkey seems really, really, really far away. So, that's really kind of through the numbers what I'm looking for. How can I poignantly and powerfully tell what we're seeing on the ground and what this looks like? Okay. Oops. Okay, so that's kind of the key takeaway from my Türkiye experience, and we can get in. You can ask me questions about it and that sort of stuff. But I thought it might also be helpful to go over things that will make you successful as a communicator in the field doing this type of work. Obviously, there's all sorts of other field communications you could do, but particularly in my line of work, there are some really core fundamentals that contribute to success. And I would say the Türkiye experience was really, really successful for these three reasons. Okay, showcasing humanity. The global Red Cross and Red Crescent Network is really, really, really about shared humanity, and humanity is the center of our work. So for me, storytelling is really about creating these shared connections and connections through humanity. And sometimes, you'll go in, you'll meet someone, or um, you'll be at an event and you have the story in your head, and you have, all right, I got this buttoned up. Let's go in and out, 30 minutes. Let's get this done, right? They're operational challenges. I need to execute. I need to move. Sometimes you need to stop. You need to show humanity yourself, and you need to just sit and listen. And I found that the most surprising and the most successful of stories, and the most successful I've been in my role, is really when I just stop and listen. Although I've talked to now for almost 25 minutes, but listening is really, really key to being a great communicator. And then the thing I need to do is find the hook and link that story to the program. This is a young woman. Her name is Diane Bhatti. She is a refugee from the Refugee Day is I think it's June 19th. So June 19th or July 19th. But I met her and we were talking about what does it mean to be a refugee and what does that look like? And so we talked about all sorts of things. She gave me very canned answers. And I was like, walk me through your first moments arriving in the United States. And she told me about coming from the Congo. They had lived in this refugee camp, and life was hard and things were challenging. And then she told me about getting to America, and her first meal with her family was a rotisserie chicken from Walmart. And she said to this day, when she sees a rotisserie chicken at Walmart, she tears up and she thinks about what that means for her. They hadn't eaten a proper meal in months and months. They hadn't had time to break bread as a family. And that is a moment, right? And that is a beautiful moment to be able to share how the Red Cross helped her, to be able to share what this experience was, to be able to share this global sense of humanity. And anyway, that was the hook, and we got a big op-ed published in Al Jazeera, which I was really, really proud of, because I felt like I was able to stop, to listen, and to authentically showcase Diane's humanity. Okay, so making it personal. Again, why should people care about work that's around the globe? Why should anybody care about what's happening in Ukraine, or what's happening in the wake of the evacuation of Afghanistan? Why do people care? And I think that goes back to making it super, super personal. I spent a bit of time in Hungary working with our shelters in the wake of the Ukraine crisis. There are, I think it's 14 million refugees and internally displaced people in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, which Saturday will mark the official 2-year anniversary. But this is a mass displacement we had not seen since World War II. At some point, people get fatigue. They get fatigue on hearing about this. They get fatigue on really engaging with it. And I went to a Red Cross shelter, and this woman here up on the top left, her name is Lumidia, and she is the boss. She's absolutely terrifyingly lovely. And she was in a Red Cross shelter, and we had given her funds to spend however she wanted to spend them. And she wanted to make borscht. She wanted to make the traditional Ukrainian soup of borscht. And she is there, and she is directing everyone and pointing and moving around. And I thought, all right, this is something. And so I spent an afternoon making borscht with her. And it was absolutely amazing, but a way to really make this personal, right? Everybody has a grandma or a mom or an aunt who is the boss of the kitchen, right? And so this story really, it really sang, because I was able to really kind of open up that personal moment that everyone can connect to. This little girl right here is 6 years old. I met her at a military base in New Mexico. There were 50,000 Afghan evacuees living at this base. It was right after September of 21. And this girl is the sweetest little thing. And one of our volunteers here on the left, volunteer on the left is called Michaela. And Michaela saw that this little girl, and I'm blanking on her name right now, it's going to come to me as soon as the presentation's done. But Michaela saw that this little girl needed to be carried everywhere around the camp. She did not have, she had an issue with her leg. She needed to be in a wheelchair. And in the rush of the evacuation, she did not have her wheelchair. It was a very chaotic situation, and getting resources in. This was right after the situation had happened. Getting resources in was really challenging, including getting wheelchairs. This young girl on the left, 19-year-old volunteer with the American Red Cross, saw this, and she said, "This is unacceptable. I am going to do everything under my power to get a wheelchair to this young 6-year-old girl." And it was the most beautiful moment that we could all relate to and that we could all connect with. And it really told the story of our services and how we help people in both warmth and in practicality. Okay, so the last bit of advice, and then we can open it up for questions in just a minute as I wrap up here, is you need to make it engaging, right? So oftentimes that's just personal thoughts and reflections. Sometimes it's kind of this like silly of like, hey, what am I doing in the field and how can someone connect to this? There's also that connection and conversation, and then linking to our content, but putting it in a way that people really can understand. And then, if there's a breaking news, putting it in the context of, wow, I see that there's another earthquake or there was an aftershock. We're here, we're still responding, we will not be deterred, right? So really thinking about how you can make content engaging is really, really key to success in the field. And now if the technology will work, I'm going to show you a little piece of social that I did when I was in Türkiye. And I have to tell you, everybody with whom I was deployed made fun of me because this is the dumbest piece of social, the most asinine piece of social content that I did, but it went viral. And I'll talk about why in just a second, but I'm going to click it up and let's see if it'll let me pull it up here.
Hi, I'm Susan Malandrino with the American Red Cross. I am currently deployed with the International Red Cross to Turkey. We are here. We are helping communities impacted by the devastating earthquake. So this is our tent. This is the ladies' tent here. And it will show you, actually tonight is very warm. It's been pretty cold. And we just had a big crew of people leave, but this tent is pretty amazing, built by the Danish Red Cross. Where I sleep, pretty cold over here in this little corner. Typically wrap yourself up.
Susan, sorry to interrupt. We can just
Not working.
we can't see the
I'm sorry. Oh, crush. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can change it. Thank you. So sorry. Let me see if I can stop the share, and then apologies, everyone. Let's see if I can share my screen, and I'll just share here we go. Okay, sorry, everybody. All right, give me one sec. All right, can you see it now, Patricia?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So whatever. It's just thank you for that.
Really tight, and just expose this tiny little bit of your face. The temperatures are warming up here, but we come prepared with all sorts of gear to really withstand the elements. So hi, I'm standing outside of one of our vehicles here. This is how we get out to some of the more remote, more hard hit areas all over southern Turkey. A massive amount of people have been impacted with this quake, both in Turkey and in Syria. And the level of destruction is really hard to wrap your mind around. So we are visiting communities. We're going with the Turkish Red Crescent, who are doing an incredible job helping provide cooking equipment, helping provide medical care, really figuring out what people need and what are the next steps and how do we assist people. That's really our role here. Hi, I'm
Oh gosh, hold on, let me stop it. Hold on. Okay, sorry everyone. All right, here we go. Going to stop that share and then go back to my presentation if you'll bear with me for just 1 second. Okay, all right. Let's see. All right, screen share. All right. Okay. All right. Did that work, Patricia?
Yep, I can see.
Okay. All right. So who cares that I'm in a tent? Like, I'm not showing pictures of destruction. I'm not showing pictures of sadness and heartbreak. But for whatever reason, that post went viral. It between Facebook and Instagram had like 500,000 views, which is crazy for the work that we do. That's pretty large, right? And it was honestly because people could connect and relate. And you know, would I rather have had something that is more impactful about you know, just the tragedy and the heartbreak of this go viral? Yes, but this is positive in that it helps showcase what we're doing. It helps drive donations. It helps people care. So again, that every day really does kind of matter in these sorts of situations. People want to understand what does life look like. Okay, and then lastly, this young gentleman right here, he was 15 and his name is Umet. And his name in Turkish means hope. And I'm laughing because he asked me out on a date, which is just absolutely ridiculous, but just full of hope and so much just joy in the most challenging of times. And we had a great afternoon talking about his challenges and his plans for rebuilding his life and his family's life. So it's really, really amazing. So key takeaways here, consider this profession if you want to do impactful work and you're really curious and interested in the world. This job is really good if you want to help people. And then, you know, I meet a lot of people and I find that almost every single person has a story worth sharing. And, you know, you've got to be ethical in that storytelling. And then, you know, a key to success is finding the personal, expanding it to the mission and to the service delivery. And then lastly, I mean, I really believe that empathy and enthusiasm are contagious, right? And that's how personal connections are so key. And I'm really fortunate that I've been able to share that thus far and share it with the world thus far. So very excited about taking questions, and I'll quit sharing my screen here.
Excellent. Thank you. And you can go ahead and type in your question in the Q&A box and I'll monitor them. So we have our first question from Gabrielle. In a crisis, communicators have to process tragedy immediately to help others process it. How do you prioritize your own mental health to cope with disasters?
It's a great question. I jokingly say I'm dead inside, which is not appropriate. No, just kidding. We have some really great mental health counselors, and you are assigned when you go out on a trip like this. You are assigned a person with whom you can speak day or night, which is great. It is a challenge. I'm not going to lie. There was a moment in Türkiye, I met a man who was standing outside of, I can barely even talk about it still. It's been more than a year and I can barely talk about it. He was standing outside his shop and his, in that area I showed you of the flattened area of Hatay that I said is the size of Atlanta. He was standing outside of his place of business and he was waiting for the bulldozers to come, hoping that he would recover his laptop, because his laptop had the only pictures of his daughter who had been killed, who was my daughter's age. And I had to walk away. I had to still to this day, anyway, I had to walk away and I still think about him all the time. So there are key moments that are really challenging. And I think we try our best to have some mental health services, but I think there are moments where you know that you just have to stop and pause, because you really are like living it and feeling it in a lot of ways. Great question.
Thank you. The next comment plus question. I really appreciate and thank you for what you have done in Turkey, and thank you for sharing about the communication process of the Red Cross. I would like to know how to communicate with refugees, especially in foreign aid, collecting stories, especially with language and cultural barriers. As a student applying for a nonprofit internship, including IFRC, what do you think will help you win the competition?
Oh, that's an intense question. One, I'm really glad that you're talking about the cultural competency bit, because it's so important. I don't know if I referenced this in the beginning. We never send anyone to a disaster unless we are requested to do so by that country. So we wouldn't just show up in Turkey without being asked to do so. And so you have a little bit of time before you go somewhere to understand the cultural nuances, to understand the cultural norms, and to understand what is and isn't appropriate. So I would say, depending on what population you're working with, do your research. Typically, we are always working with a host national society. So the Turkish Red Crescent or the Lebanese Red Cross, and you would have a counterpart that will really go over what is appropriate to wear, what is just a whole litany of different things perhaps you haven't thought about. So I would say the number one thing is to ask questions. Ask questions, is this appropriate if I talk to you? Are you okay with sharing your story? Really, it's kind of a give and take where you're really reading the other person's body language and kind of determining what is acceptable. In terms of what makes you a strong candidate, I would say being humble and being inquisitive and being, like any communications professional, being a reader about different cultures, being someone who wants to know more or who wants to travel. Really kind of that desire to realize that your perspective is one of many, and it's not that they're right or wrong, but everyone comes from a different place, and trying to understand how you can kind of meet. If that adequately answers the question.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I remember I was in Rwanda in 2004. So this was the 10-year anniversary of the genocide. And I remember walking around the memorial sites were basically the churches that were completely obliterated. So you're walking amongst bones and still smell the scent of death. And then I ended up watching Hotel Rwanda. I don't remember how much longer after. And, just thinking how it doesn't even come close to doing, the genocide justice of coverage. But I'll never forget the scene in that movie where they're sitting at the dinner table and there's coverage of it. And the journalist says, people in the United States are going to see this, just keep eating their dinner like nothing is ever happening. And that must be how you feel too, in doing your work. And that's why your work is so important. Like you said, there's still starvation in Africa. There are so many issues around the world. And how do you get people to care?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, and I think we're seeing, the humanitarian sector is really, really strained. I listened to a piece on NPR yesterday about the limits of funding and where we can go. With climate change and rising sea levels, we're seeing just more frequent disasters. I mean, definitely in the States. There used to be something like a 14-day gap, right, between massive disasters. We are seeing them back to back to back to back, and they are more severe in intensity and frequency. And I think getting people to care, because the space is just so crowded, it is a real challenge, right? And if I have that, quite frankly, ridiculous video of me walking around a tent, like, if that gets people to care, great, right? If that gets people to donate and helps, get more services, then great. I'm all about it. So I think that's it's a real challenge, right? To find new and interesting ways to storytell. I just came back from Gaza, and still kind of processing all that we saw. It is. The people with whom I traveled have been in the humanitarian sector far longer than I. And my boss, who's been the president of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, has been a humanitarian for 43 years. And she said she has never seen anything. She's responded to Haiti. She responded to Katrina, all over the world. Tigray in Ethiopia. She said she has never seen anything of this magnitude. And so I kept thinking about that. And I wrote a speech for her that was delivered at the United Nations last week in Geneva. And we took out, after we left Gaza, we sat and we, kind of, what were your observations? What were my observations? And the most telling for both of us, a Palestinian Red Crescent volunteer said to me, we said to both of us, we all feel like we are on a waiting list to die.
Mm.
And that, just chills down my whole body, because with that's my timer to stop talking. So with other crises, with Türkiye, you feel that there's a sense to rebuild and to find hope and to find what is the next. In this crisis, I don't feel like we've reached that point yet. I think that was really, really hard. And I don't know how. I'm still struggling as a communicator to figure out, okay, how can I best take what we saw there and what we saw at the kibbutz in Israel, this just collective heartbreak and sadness, and how can we turn those stories into something that makes people want to move and act.
Yeah, and to there was another question, or more, if you don't mind expanding on, they asked if you could tell more about your recent experience in Egypt and Gaza and Israel.
Yeah, so it was intense. In a word, I think the whole region is really feeling it. I mean, we started in Lebanon, and Lebanon has about, I think it's like 1.5 million Syrian refugees already. So and then Lebanon right now is still reeling from economic crises and reeling from the Beirut blast, which was in 2020. I think it was in 2020 or 19. And we went and toured the Beirut site. It is just leveled. So they have so many economic challenges, and now they have a displaced population because of the south of the country is fighting, Hezbollah is fighting back and forth with the IDF. And so now there are 300,000 Lebanese refugees in the center of Lebanon, in addition to 200,000 Palestinian refugees that have come over. So you have just a region that is just strained to the breaking point, which I thought was really, really telling. Over in Egypt, we've really felt that same strain. I mean, strain from our workers who are trying to get goods in to Rafah at the crossing where Egypt's Sinai Peninsula hits the West Bank. And they are facing so many challenges of getting goods in, and they are just heavy with this burden. And then Egypt itself has the Sudan crisis. So there are so many Sudanese that have come into Egypt. That's put a strain on already really, really tight social services, where the currency is faltering. And you have a geopolitical situation that is nuanced and complex and challenging. And then I thought it was really telling to, obviously, I've talked about what I saw in Gaza, but in Tel Aviv, we met with the families of the hostages. We met with survivors of the attacks of October 7th. To hear their collective heartbreak was really, really, really intense. There is just this overwhelming just sense of mourning and powerlessness. And then over in the West Bank is really struggling too. So we went over to Ramallah and spent time with our staff over there, and they are they're not okay. And the West Bank itself is really economically struggling. So it was a lot. There are a lot of challenges, and there are no easy answers. I would say is really what I witnessed. Still kind of unpacking all that we saw, and how can we help, right? How can we help get goods to people who need it? How can we help provide mental health resources to people who are suffering? Those are all questions that we are addressing and we are working on.
Thank you. And we have a question from Rhonda. Hi, Rhonda. She's one of my students. For the stories you publish or social media content, how closely do you work/collaborate with your disaster country counterpart?
very closely. And I think one of your other students, I'm not sure, Rhonda, who it was before, you asked about the cultural competency. And I think I learned that on day one on my lesson in Türkiye. I walked in and there's a team, it was all men. And I walked in and I said, "Hi guys, I specialize in disaster, in reputational risk management and disasters, and I am here to help you." And the team said, "Thank you, American lady. We'll take it under advisement," which I thought was a good lesson for me to brush up on my cultural competency and to maybe slow down a little bit. But during my time in Türkiye, I ended up working with them every day. We got up to a rocky start, but we ended up having a wonderful relationship, and we were able to share best practices and to share all sorts of content and strategies for success. And we were really successful because of a willingness to say, "All right, look, I don't know about your country. Tell me, and how can I learn, and how can I best help you?"
Yeah, just to tag on to that, do you think a lot of it has to do with being a female as well? You coming into these countries, especially of,
I do. I mean, every country is different, right? And everybody has different experiences. I would say that it does add an additional complexity. It's not right or wrong. It just adds an additional complexity. Absolutely.
right. And then I have another question to you. So I know you recorded the video. How much of actual social media content do you create?
Oh God, so much.
Okay.
It is. I'd rather be writing long form stories or doing interviews or talking to people like you guys. The social media content I now run. So our president's account, I run her account.
Okay.
And when I was over at Amcross, I did a lot of the content, and we would have teams that helped position it. But I've gotten okay-ish. If you want to follow K-Forbes, IFRC, or I can drop my stuff in the chat if you want to follow what I'm doing on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But social media, it's got to go in tandem, right? But I struggle a little bit because it's hard to divorce yourself and your work from the noise in the ether, right? And I think sometimes social is so integral to any strategy, but I would say, as you're looking at your careers, or as you're looking at what you want to do as a communicator, I would say social is only one component, and it can't always be the driving force, right? It can give you a temperature, it can help amplify your messages, but I just worry sometimes that it eclipses. It's like this just mass that eclipses everything else. So that's something sometimes that is a real challenge. Yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? I know we're coming up on our time here. In the meantime, Susan, I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and for doing this despite the transitions and long flights and just like you said, processing a lot of things that you've just experienced. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciated it, and really wish you guys all of the best in your careers.
Right. And we have this recorded, so we'll make sure we post it on LinkedIn as well, and I'll tag you. So if you want to share it with anyone.
Great, cool.
All right. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good afternoon. Take care.